And then we do. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Inside the Game with Coach Jim Evans and John Blomstrann. We got a great special guest tonight in Lyle Yorks, and I'm going to pass it on to John because he was Lyle's coach. So, John, why don't you introduce Lyle?
Lyle, thank you for coming on. I'll give an introduction for the beginning of your career, and then we're counting on you to fill in the post-college story, which is going to be pretty interesting. Anyways, I'm the E.O. Smith coach or have been the E.O. Smith coach for a lot of years. And Lyle played at E.O. Smith from 1984 to 1987. It was sort of the golden years of E.O. Smith soccer, although you could say that before he arrived also. So as a sophomore in 1985, we won a state championship. And Lyle was a center midfielder at that time as a sophomore. He played all 4 years. And in 1987, we won another state championship against Danbury. And Lyle scored the only goal in that game. And I remember it was a game at Maroney Stadium in Stores, which nobody appreciated since we were such the local team. I also remembered it was like a frozen field, and I was worried just that Lyle in particular and Timmy Horton would get hurt because he get fouled and you fall on ice, basically. It was so cold that day. And the other thing that happened at the end of Lyle's career, he scored 78 goals and had about 58 assists. He was a high school All-American as a senior. But I was also doing like the New England region top high school teams. And I would call into Eugene Chisowitz, who was the national director. And it was called, well, there's Gatorade Player of the Year, which Lyle ended up becoming, but there was also a ranking of the high school teams, which usually St. Benedict's was number one. But anyways, we had a dinner in Hartford at the Civic Center, Gaetano's restaurant, and Hank Steinbrecher, which a lot of people know, who was involved with the Federation, was the Gatorade representative, and Eugene Chisowitz was there. And we had Mickey Fitzgerald, who played soccer at E.O. Smith, and Mr. McCarthy, who was the guidance director. And it was just a very impressive dinner to think that, little E.O. Smith would have the best player in the country. But Eugene Chisowitz told me at the time that he goes, boy, you are a really humble guy because you didn't push him. But I researched it, and he's the best player in the country. That's what he said. So it was pretty cool. As far as Virginia, I did watch a couple of those finals at Rutgers that Lyle was in. And he was a left midfielder, a trailing forward, a center midfielder at times on great teams with great players, which he might talk about some of them. And I think just like in high school, as a sophomore and as a senior, now you're national champions instead of state champions at Virginia. So I'm sure people are very interested in Lyle's post-college career and profession as well. But I guess I'll leave off there. And congratulations, Lyle. And you can sort of add to the story of how you became one of the premier player agents in the country after that.
That's great. Well, first off, great to be here. John, great to see you. Jim, great to see you. You guys, it's been a while, and it's always great to, go back to your roots, right, in Connecticut. And just to touch upon what you just spoke about, I was really fortunate to grow up at Mansfield because it was kind of the hotbed really in the country, with the Maronis and dating back in the 70s when we won state championships all the way through. So it was kind of in the water, in the blood there. So played with so many great players in town and then in state. And then eventually with some of the youth national teams, and then at UVA. And then from Virginia, it was interesting because we graduated in '92, and there wasn't a professional league at that point. So it was really indoor soccer. MLS didn't start until '96. So I basically was at that point looking to try and go to Europe. I ended up playing indoor soccer at the Milwaukee Wave and played with Dan Donegan, which a lot of people here tonight would remember him from playing at UConn. So we were teammates and we were very close friends as well. I went to Denmark and played a season in the Super League there with a club called Næstved. And then I came back and really just trying to find, at that point in time, what was the next step for me. And I was substitute teaching at E.O. Smith, so I would see you in the hallways, John. I subbed a little bit at Wyndham Tech, and it was always a fun time because my sister and brothers were coming through. Tracy and Russ were coming through the school. So best days when I was a gym teacher. So I was playing badminton against all the top kids, the Cherwin and Greaser and the generation behind me. But and then from there, I ended up playing with the New York Fever with a lot of players that are now in MLS. So Peter Vermes is the president of Sporting Kansas City. Bill Manning's in Toronto as the president. He was a teammate. John DeBrito, a lot of people will remember, he was on that team. Mickey Kites, who's another Connecticut top player out of Norwalk. So it was a fun period. And then what I remember really next was, actually, I was at Chuck's Steakhouse in Storrs, Connecticut with Dan Donegan, and I was banned from the UConn soccer office because I chose to go to Virginia, and Dan talked me into becoming a coach. So that night at like 12:30, we snuck into Gamble Pavilion, and obviously with his keys and whatnot, and then we sent out 10 resumes and 10 cover letters, and the next for college coaching positions. So I was looking around the country. There wasn't really a professional league, and Cal Berkeley called within a week. And I ended up moving out to California, which was great to really understand the landscape out there. So, and that started my coaching career. And then from there, coached there for 3 seasons, and then MLS expanded from 10 teams to 12 teams. And Bruce Arena called and asked if I wanted to come into preseason. And I would train with the team whenever they were playing out west. So I was still kind of involved at that point. But I hadn't played professional soccer for 3 years. I was coaching but training with the team quite a bit. And I ended up making the team. And then that was the '98 season. And then from there, without going on too much, went back. And I wanted to learn from one of the best coaches at the college ranks, was a guy called Bobby Clark. So then I went to coach at Stanford as I finished my master's degree at the University of San Francisco. So that brings you kind of right up to when I became a sports agent. So.
Okay, I forgot one thing. Sorry, I'm going to jump in. Anybody watching, please feel free to ask any questions in your comments or make any comments, and I'll watch for those. Okay, thanks.
Well, one quick question. I know one of the players that you represent is his name is Caden Clark. Is there no relationship to Bobby Clark?
Yeah, it's no relationship. Caden's actually from Minnesota, and I think you're going to hear his name quite a bit now. He was at the Barca Academy in Arizona. There was interest in Europe, but without an EU passport, you can't actually play or sign a professional contract in Europe until the age of 18. So we moved him to New York Red Bull, and then he scored a goal that went viral actually in Connecticut at I forget the name of the stadium in East Hartford where UConn plays football, but he scored against Toronto in the dying minutes of that game, and he'll be going to Europe fairly soon. So, but no relation.
I see.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk about how your business got started and some of the. I know you have a list of older clients. I should say older, not compared to me, but older clients and younger clients, current players and ones that have stopped playing. And maybe you could sort of give us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, basically, it was interesting. I was in San Francisco coaching at Stanford, and how I got into the industry, the Cal Berkeley job, head coaching job was open, and I knew a lot of the alumni, obviously, from coaching there 3 seasons, and the associate AD was actually from UVA. So I was running 2 parallel kind of paths because actually, coincidentally, a player from Avon, Chris Brownie, who played at UPenn, had a friend that was involved in the agency business over in Europe. So they came to interview me as well. And I flew over there. So I was running I had 2 kind of opportunities. It was that fork in the road you talk about. And once I went across, I knew that's what I wanted to be. I went to a Liverpool game, and it was just, I knew that I wanted to start kind of in the ground floor as the sport was continuing to grow here. And that was when I started. So I started in 2000 as a sports agent, and you kind of fake it till you make it type of deal. And I was working out of my house, and I remember you have a different phone line, players calling at different hours, and you pause the movie and click over, and they just assumed you're at the office 24/7. But really, beginning years, really putting a lot of hours and time in growing the business. And my former agent, actually, Paul Stretford, who's Wayne Rooney's agent, was the one that really believed in this market and asked if I would come on and kind of run the U.S. market. But by doing that, it was literally just working out of my house. And then as it grew, in 95, we finally got an office in Georgetown when I brought in another employee. But that's when it all started, right at the kind of the beginning. MLS was 4 years old, and I was signing a lot of my former teammates, and the minimum salary was still, I think, $24,000 at the time. So it was now it's grown to the point where did a contract last year for Josie Altidore where he earned over $8 million a year. So it's shows a growth over 25 years. It's pretty phenomenal to see where the sport's come. And even last night in the final, obviously you see Atlanta United and Seattle getting 50 some odd thousand to games, and they're in the top 20 globally in attendance in the world week in, week out when there's fans at the stadium. So the growth has been phenomenal.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. So maybe you should start with your list of initial players. Like, who was the first player that you became an agent for?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I worked with Paul in the UK. So a lot of the players he brought across were American players that I played with that were good friends of mine. Okay. So he would do their playing contracts, and as I was getting more involved, and when they moved to America, to the US, I would help them. So Claudio Reyna, Joe Max Moore, Brad Friedel, Eddie Lewis. There was a host of players that were really successful overseas. So helped in everything there, but Paul was their main agent. And my first client was actually Devin Barclay, who is a youth national team player. And now I'm actually negotiating Nike contracts with him. He works for Nike. His journey was interesting. He actually played MLS in Tampa, DC United Columbus, and then after a practice and after one of the training sessions, he was kicking field goals just for fun, and Ohio State saw him and picked him up. He ended up kicking I think it was a game-winning field goal. You can Google it, but in the Rose Bowl. So you talk about different paths, and he did that, and now he's at Nike. But he was my first client, and my first class, MLS class, I had the number 1 pick, Chris Carrieri at Chapel Hill. Ollie Curtis was number 2. He is now the general manager in Toronto. Number 3 I didn't have, which was Mark Lisi. Number 4 was Ryan Nelson, who played at Stanford. Ryan then went on. I did all his 7 Premier League contracts for him. After that, he played at Blackburn. He was captain. Mark Hughes made him captain after 6 weeks there, and then Tottenham, QPR, and then I did his coaching contract at TFC. Brian Mullen out of Creighton, Devin Barclay, Dwayne Di Rosario, Jose Burciago of the youth team. So quite a big list, and that kind of built the momentum and to kind of carry on from there. So And then my two biggest clients that came on, Ryan, Dwayne, those are big. After that, the next year was Carlos Bocanegra and DeMarcus Beasley. So once they came across and I moved them to Europe, Carlos to Fulham and DeMarcus to PSV, then it really started to take off from there. So it was an interesting journey, but Devon was my first, and the first two that I put in Europe, Carlos Bocanegra and DeMarcus Beasley.
Wow.
Okay, Lyle, we're going to go back in time just a little bit because I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
From Dave Latourette.
Okay.
How does a kid who played at E.O. Smith in the shadows of the Yukon soccer stadium make the decision to leave and go to Virginia? What went into that decision?
Yeah, that was a tough one. I remember it really clearly. NCAA, you're allowed 5 paid visits. So the schools I looked at, and Coach Maroney wanted me to take an official visit, even that I knew everything about the school and was a big fan. For a long time, I went to UVA on a visit, NC State with George Tarantini, and Duke when John Rennie was there. And I canceled my visit with Ziggy Schmidt to UCLA. I wanted to stay closer to home. To answer your question, it came down to UConn and UVA. It was a really difficult decision. I was at Coach Maroney's, I remember the week before, at his house on Hillside, right off campus. And my favorite jean jacket, I left at his house. And then I committed to Virginia. So that was a lost item. I wasn't brave enough to go back and get it at that point. I remember he had a foosball table in his garage, and I left my jacket there. So, but the answer is twofold. One, the ACC was getting bigger and bigger and stronger as a soccer conference. Two, a lot of my friends that I played with the regional national teams a year ahead of me, Tony Miola, John Maisner, Chris Kelderman went to China with me, Kurt Analfo, another top player out of Connecticut who's with the New England Revs right now. They were all there. John Harkes was a player I always looked up to. And so that swayed me heavily towards UVA. And then just experiencing a different campus because I knew UConn so well. I mean, being on our high school ground, I would stay times at Dan Donegan's dorm, and sometimes go to Huskies, or just kind of I knew the whole environment so well. It was just a new experience. So that's why ultimately I chose. It was a tough decision. The final piece of that story was I called both schools in Mike McCarthy's office. I don't know if you know that, John. And I was so nervous. So I called Coach Maroney first. And I think I was shaking. I was really nervous. I was picturing the clipboards and everything else. And he was just silence for like 5 seconds, which felt like a minute. And I didn't know what to say. And it was just really uncomfortable. And then he just told me I made a big mistake. And that was it. And I remember earlier, like Chris Dodd calling, recruiting Tim Maisley a lot. There was a lot of pressure to stay in state. And then my very next call was to Bruce Arena, who was actually surprised. He thought I was going to commit to UConn, and he was really happy. And that kind of got me a little bit over the prior conversation. But it was a really difficult one. I would have loved to play for Coach Maroney and with Dan Donegan, and they had a good class as well, and all the fans and my hometown. But that's what drew me away.
I have one interesting story. I was sort of naive as a high school coach to all the, national scene that Lyle's talking about. And I don't know if you remember, Lyle, we were at this dusty old field at Ellington. We weren't playing very well. In those days, we were way better than Ellington. Ellington has become great now with Roy Gernon there forever. But this coach was sitting on the corner of this dusty field just watching. And we barely won, maybe, or, like 1-0 or something, Lyle. And then it was Ziggy Schmidt. And I guess I knew him, but he became so famous then that for him to show up at this sort of podunk high school game where it was a crappy field and we didn't even play that well, it was amazing to see.
Yeah. I remember, funny enough, Ziggy and I talked about that when I brought Clint Dempsey to Seattle Sounders. We had a dinner at Adrian Enhauer, the owner's house, and Ziggy we were all there, and we had a laugh about that very game. They played UConn, I think, the next day.
Oh, okay.
UConn beat UCLA because he's a UCLA coach at the time. I think 2-1 or something. Danny, I know Dan had maybe both goals, and it was an upset. But he was recruiting Tim and myself, so he went there, and I looked at UCLA. It's just really, obviously, it was far, but yeah, it was funny. And playing at Ellington, and you have this famous coach there. So
I know.
He was a great guy.
Okay, Lyle, I have another one for you.
Okay.
From Tony Orta. He says, Lyle, it's Tony Orta. Can you talk about the difference of the acceptance of players today in Europe versus 10 years from your perspective?
Yeah, good to hear from Tony. I remember our indoor games all together, and I laugh afterwards. Yeah, it's changed so rapidly, and now a lot of it's analytical, data driven. The game's getting younger and younger. When I first started, I had a dual VCR, and I would convert tapes and send them across and try and convince. I remember I was in Gelsenkirchen at Schalke, and I actually was pushing, I forget who at the time, and Diego from Brazil, his VCR tape was right next to one that I was putting in. So it's just different. You didn't really have access to, now all the games are televised. You have Y Scout, where it breaks down highlights and every element of a player. A lot of the clubs hire data, kind of the Billy Bean kind of Moneyball. So a lot of the professional teams really look into the data behind players. The biggest one was just trying to convince clubs that American players can play. So it was tough. I think, there were quite a few that went over, but when John Harkes went over and scored the goal against Peter Shilton from 40, with Sheffield Wednesday and playing with Chris Waddle, it started to open people's eyes to basically the level of talent we can develop here. And now today, the phone's ringing, it's all incoming, and you can see, and the game's getting younger and younger. So a player like Caden Clark, we talked about earlier, we had 4 or 5 offers in Europe straight away, just based on the tournaments that these kids play in, Nike showcases, Dallas, whatnot. So it's different, and take the Bundesliga, all the Bundesliga clubs come to the Dallas Cup, and they start picking players, or to the Nike friendlies. So, and then the other thing that's changed, Tony, is I remember moving Simon Elliott, a New Zealand player, to Fulham in the Premier League at age 31 from the Columbus Crew. And that would never happen today. Now, when you're 26, 27, it's more difficult. It's really 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds they're looking for. So the game's just gotten a lot younger. But it's changed in every aspect, every way.
It used to be that college was kind of a given, that, you were going to go to college and then see what you could do after. But that's obviously changed, right, Kyle? Lyle?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny. You look at, I always say, hey, there's more than one way to skin a cat. You look at Jordan Morris, who played last night. He played 3 years at Stanford. And I think the college game can really develop players. Claudio Reyna, you look at one of the best players in our country's history, played 3 years, and Bruce basically kicked him out of school because it was just too easy. Just said, look, you have to go, because he had a chance to go to Barcelona the year before.
Wow.
Johan Cruyff picked him up in a limo at the Olympics in Barcelona. And that's when they had Romario, Stoichkov, Koeman, Laudrup.
Wow.
And he turned that down and he went back to UVA for one more year. And then right before the 94 World Cup, Bayer Leverkusen. So he went there, but Bernd Schuster was there, Ulf Kirsten. I mean, some top players. Clint Dempsey, he played in college. Carlos Bocanegra played in college. So all these players, now it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but the norm is to bypass and then go straight across, or straight with MLS homegrown contracts or opportunities in Europe. A lot of the players are going direct. But if you look at even this year, there were some really good rookies that came out of college. 2 out of UVA, actually. DK in Orlando, scored quite a few goals. Kessler up in New England, started most of the games. So I always tell the whether you go 4 years like Ryan Nelson and then captain of a Premier League club, or part of the time like a Jordan Morris, or direct like a DeMarcus Beasley, it's that you can all end up playing Champions League or in a Premier League, or just a different kind of career path.
Lyle, looking at your list, maybe I'll go to the two extremes. I'd like to hear a little about Tyler Adams, because I just think he's a tremendous player. But then on your older list, you have Brian McBride. And we used to, Austin and Franz and Jimmy and we used to go out to Michigan State, and there were a lot of St. Louis people there, Joe Baum and Steve Shadow and everybody. And they talked about Pat McBride, like, he was the best ever. And that was Brian's father, I guess. And so, I'd like to hear a little bit about Tyler Adams as sort of one of your premier younger players, and how you got hooked up with Brian McBride also. Yeah,
it's funny. We could start with Brian, I guess. Brian, I remember our fourth year, we won the national championship at UVA. We beat St. Louis in the semifinal. They had Mike Sorber, Brian McBride, and I can't remember Mark Santel. I think his brother was on the team, but they had a top team. And Brian was just he was a top player, number one pick in the MLS draft in the league in the inaugural season. But Brian was initially scouted by Paul Stretford, who is Wayne Rooney's agent. So I inherited Brian, but we played against each other, so we knew each other pretty well when he was already part of the company. And then helped, he was at Fulham when Bocanegra was there. And then since then, we speak on a regular basis. He works for U.S. Soccer. We do quite a bit with Brian on the marketing side. He did some TV work as well. He's one of the hardest workers on the field and looks after himself. He still looks like he can play, and he can play. He's just a great guy. But he was such an aerial threat. In some ways, I think he could hold up the ball. If you're under pressure, you could play it long to Brian, and he could hold up the play until everyone else could join in. But he, oddly, I think he could be even more successful in the Premier League than even in MLS, because he was just so brave and so strong in the air. And he has a small restaurant at Craven Cottage named after him, where Fulham plays.
Oh, yeah.
And he and Clint were a big part of keeping Fulham up one season. And Brian scored quite a few goals, and also in Germany. But Brian's fantastic. Love working with Brian, a really good friend of mine. And we still do quite a bit together. Tyler is just that next generation, one of the most talented players. He just covers so much ground. He's so brave. He moves the ball. He's just dynamic. He's one of the most humble players you come across, and he's just 21, and he's already scored in the quarterfinals of the Champions League against Atletico Madrid, and played all these Bundesliga games. And when he was playing, but I signed him at age 15, so I met Tyler and his family. We were at a hotel in New Jersey. The U.S. team was playing their final send-off game before they went to Brazil. It was Jurgen Klinsmann's team, and we had quite a few. And I knew all about Tyler, loved he's so talented. He comes from a hotbed too, kind of like Mansfield, kind of like the area where we're from, because Dario Bros, if you remember that name, Chris Santo, Boa Shiani, all these guys are about 2 hours north of the city on the Hudson River. So Tyler's from there. His dad was a good player and part of it all too. So it's kind of in the blood, and his mom was a good player. She played. But Tyler is fantastic. So we signed him at 15. And when I did that deal, we had a plan to play USL, which they won the USL championship. Aaron Long was on that team as well. And then Dax McCarty got moved, and so did Sasha Kleckstein, to make room for him to come in for his development. And then we actually had a deal done with Leipzig a year prior but the MLS really wanted to play one more full season. And but we had everything agreed a year before. and then he hit the ground running. He had trained in Leipzig and also Salzburg, but I mean, there's not enough words you could say about Tyler in terms of where he's going and his play. So he's great. But at age 15, he's playing against men and contributing. The only other story I'd say is Mo Adu, who actually was doing the TV game. He was a client as well. So worked with Mo, Glasgow Rangers and Stoke and Philadelphia and whatnot. And he was injured, so he played for Bethlehem Steel, and they played Red Bull 2. And he called after and said, I've never played against this guy because it was the most frustrating game because it gave him no time or space. Whenever he's on the ball, he said he just wanted to like throw an elbow at him. He said Tyler was just the most competitive. He's like, you have to sign this kid. And I said, well, we already have. And then now they're all friends and whatnot. But but Tyler's just made a really big impact very quickly. So.
Yeah, Mo Adu was sitting right in between Robbie Stone and Lexi Lawless on the commentary last night, right?
Yeah, that's Mo. Yeah, Mo, and then Rob from Simsbury, and we always joke around about the E.O. Smith and our club team when we went to Pikes Peak together and in Colorado, and just a history of Connecticut soccer. I mean, even that under-20 World Cup, you have 3 players, Kurt, Tim, and myself, and against Brazil, all 3 of us started, so that was. Impressive from the state of Connecticut. John Garvey, remember him from Guilford, and John Costellas and George Costello. There's so many names. I don't want to leave people out, but it's there's a lot of talent that came through the state.
Yeah. And Lyle, I wanted to show you. I got number 17 here.
I like that.
Give it to you, huh?
That was a number. I love that. I remember we got new uniforms. My freshman year, we had the old uniforms with the big S.
Yeah.
That year I was 20, and then my second year I got 17, and wore that all the way through my sophomore year, and it was and we won state, so it was a good luck number.
I'm sad to say we haven't retired your number, and some kids don't know when I'm handing out uniforms that they should be picking that one.
Yeah, that's great. But it's
So there's a lot of players on your list. Couple that I don't know about, like Jackson. Is it Yule?
Yeah, Jackson Yule. Yeah.
And Mihalovic.
Yeah, George Mihalovic. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's some of that next generation of U.S. national team players. So. Jackson's from Minnesota, went to UCLA, was a top player at UCLA, got drafted by San Jose and became one of their top players pretty quickly. He's just such a cerebral player. So he could play a 6, he could play an 8, but he never really puts a foot wrong in terms of he keeps the play going. Both those players played the other night with the U.S. team against El Salvador. So Jackson played as the number 6 and kind of anchored the midfield and played the whole game. And Georgie picked up a little bit of an injury, but he came in for the last 15 minutes of that game. Georgie's dad played in the old NASL, and he's from Chicago. He's a homegrown player.
Oh, okay.
He just turned 22, so there's options in Europe and within MLS here as well. He has a year left in his contract. And Jackson, we just redid his deal. So he's has a good deal here as well, and he plays for Mateus Almeida in San Jose.
Wow.
Yeah.
Lyle, what's the situation with transfer fees between MLS and European teams? Would it be the same as if a guy was just going from, say, Spain to Germany or something like that?
It's really starting to increase as a lot of the players have. I mean, if you look at some of our young players now, they're all over the top clubs in Europe. And the biggest transfer fee for a long period until 3 years ago was the deal I did with Josie Altidore when I moved him from New York he was 18, from New York to Villarreal. But that deal was still smaller because there were add-ons to get to the 10 based on games and whatnot. So it was about $8 million, which was a really big fee at that point in time. The biggest fee was out of Atlanta. So what's happened in MLS is, like the Frank Lampards and the David Beckhams and the older players that a lot of were historically the DP players. Now they're bringing in the Almirones and some of the younger players with a view to try and move them on. So Miguel Almirón from Atlanta went to Newcastle, and it was 27 million. So it's starting to catch up. Alphonso Davies broke the record that we had with Josie, and when he went to Bayern Munich, I think it was 12 million. So, and Pity Martinez just went to Saudi Arabia for 18 million. So it's starting to catch up, which is a really important part of the business model for MLS clubs, because a lot of the foreign leagues, the TV contracts really in the big leagues at least, it generates so much revenue. You can run your operation based on that, but within MLS, you're really heavily reliant. That's why the pandemic was so difficult, because the TV deal isn't quite as lucrative. So you really need spectators in the stadiums on game day to drive some of that revenue, and then transfer fees. If through your academy, if you can move players, it makes a big difference. And a lot of the deals too, you'll have a sell on. So you'll sell a player for X, and then you can retain maybe 20, 25%, 15%. So the player does really well. Your next sale, you get another bite at the apple, and you can get another, cash injection. So, but the fees now are so, you see over 100 million for a player now, and it's, for Real Madrid and Barcelona and some of these, Manchester United, Arsenal, the big clubs have that PSG, the ability to spend. So it's interesting. It's certainly changed very quickly.
Lyle, I have another question for you. A young American player, say 14 years old, 15 years old, best player in his area. In order for him to be noticed by, you and guys like you, do they need to make it to the national team level? Or are there other guys out there that maybe aren't quite at that level that are still good enough?
Yeah, it shifted a lot. To a roundabout way to answer your question, it used to be, I used to just recruit from college. And so you go to ACC tournaments, Big East tournament, what have you, and then go to Bradenton, because we had like Pulisic and Tyler and all these guys played in residency at the youth, down in Bradenton, Florida. So you would go, but now with all the MLS academies, we have scouts throughout the country that we rely on, and the game's gotten younger and younger. So players are identified at as early as 12, to be honest, 12, 13, wow. 14. And then you're tracking them, and some players are getting signed at 14, 15, 16. Tyler's a good example at 15, and Caden Clark. And so the game is very quickly moved to younger. So a lot of the players are identified at their academy level through their club teams, and then just knowing people in different areas will get a tip on a good player and then track it and ask, people we know in the area, what they know about, because it's impossible to see all the top talent, and they're coming from everywhere. I mean, DeMarcus was from Fort Wayne, Indiana. You look at the players coming through Sporting KC right now. You look at players coming out of all the different academies. There's quite a few talented players, and they're all not staying there. Like Caden Clark played in Red Bull, but he's from Minnesota, and then he went to the Barca Academy in Arizona. So players are moving very quickly at young ages.
Nice. I have two questions for you.
Okay.
Here. The first one, Lyle, is from Michael Rattlebeck. And he says, Lyle mentioned Mansfield and the town where Tyler Adams grew up as hotbeds. What are some similarities between these areas, or key elements that contribute to the talent it produces? And I'm going to ask you I'm going to tell you the other question right with it too. It's from Mark Root. And Mark says, Lyle, wasn't playing wasn't it playing pickup in the summer against older players from stores that was really key to your development?
That's good. Okay, I'll go through both of them. Well, Mark, yeah, playing against, going for Megs in the back of E.O. Smith and Lions Club Field, it's or at the field house, certainly contributed. I remember growing up, there was always a game, a small-sided game. And I think, and actually you had Eric Imler on your show recently, and he asked technically what was different in our area for development, because, and I think it was just all the small-sided games we played against players that were older. So you could go up to, Smith in the summer, and you'd have Mark Root, Gordon Clark, Kenny, you'd have all, and then you'd have, Steve Cherwin, Tommy Greaser, Mike Neal, like the younger ages, Rayner, you'd have all these, but so you had like a mixture of players, and there was a lot of time on the ball. So that really helped, I think. But I remember learning a nutmeg from Elvis Comrie, of all people, just playing in the Yukon Fieldhouse and camp. So I think where you grow up, you're a product of your environment. And then to answer the first question, it is interesting. I never really thought about it, but both areas are very rural, and soccer is the culture there. So I think when you have it embedded in your culture, I know growing up in Mansfield, it was kind of, there wasn't high school football when I was there, and Yukon soccer was drawing 4,000 or 5,000 in the 70s with Tommy Nevers, and I think when they won the national championship, there were 4 or 5 E.O. Smith players on that team in '81. You had Tim Maisley, Bill Maroney, Joe had just graduated, Jeff Bope. You had quite a few. So I think it's the environment to grow up in, to be honest. But the two areas are very similar. The rural and soccer is the main focus there, not other sports.
Lyle, if things were like they are nowadays, we wouldn't have had to play against Kurt Arnolfo at Ridgefield because we wouldn't have been in high school, but we wouldn't have had you and Timmy either, probably at E.O. Smith. That's what you were saying. You would have signed with somebody else by then, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I probably would have, depending on what period, either you would have signed directly New England Revolution homegrown, or a Red Bull or NYCFC, or one of that, or the period before that, maybe down to Bradenton with the national team for residency. And it's it's a shame on many levels too, because if you think about it, and because the experiences growing up, I wouldn't have traded that for anything. Growing up in town and the experiences of winning those state championships, and when you speak to other players, like we brought up John Harkes earlier, but his team's in Kearney, New Jersey, the same, and that's another hotbed. That was a big hotbed. But just his state championships and stuff. Those are memories and development moments that were really critical to our success. So, and at the highest level, you date back. You look at the Harkses and the Tab, Ramos, and before these players today would have been the elite and been in opportunities at the Juventus, the Leipigs, the Chelsea. Those opportunities, the players are very good at the very elite. What we have now is a lot more players at that tier, I think, that's just below, that are very, very good players. And the game has changed, the tempo of the game, the pace of the game, tactically. So there's been changes in the game, but I think at the highest level, the top talent back then would have done very well today. It's just the numbers are a lot bigger now in terms of the player pool.
Okay, Victor Santos says hello.
Hi, Victor.
And
good to hear from you.
Dave Latourette wonders how many clipboards Maroney broke when he found out you were going to Virginia.
I don't know. I was shaking on that phone call. So what's funny is I ended up doing Connecticut Soccer School, the camp that had moved from Wallingford to Massachusetts. And I remember I needed to earn some money in the summer. And I ended up doing that camp. And I felt slightly uncomfortable, but he was there. We didn't really speak. And then even at the end, he said I had made a mistake.
Wow.
I was a sophomore. We had just won the national championship. I thought it was a little bit strange. And I remember the other uncomfortable moment was my very first trip at UVA was at UNLV. And the 4 teams were UVA, UConn, UNLV, and UCLA. And 3 things stood out. One, it was uncomfortable bumping into Maroney, but I got to see Donegan and all my buddies there. 2, it was my first college trip, and I took every school book that I had, which was a mistake because I realized it was this. Yeah, so I learned that. And 3 was we would get our per diem. Bruce Arena would give us our per diem to go eat, and on the way from his room to where we could exit to go eat were all the tables and whatnot. So a lot of us went hungry because we would say we could double our money, so we'd throw it down on black in the roulette table, and that was it. So, but it was just a different era back then. But it was fun. But yeah, it was.
Well, no, you weren't the only one. I remember Dave DeBora went to Penn State instead of UConn, and he came back and scored against UConn, and Penn State beat UConn. And Timmy Horton went to BU, right? And I think he might have scored 3 goals in one game against UConn.
Yeah, he did. It's funny. You've got DeBoer. He played for Walter Barr there. It was a legend. Yeah. He was their head of delegation. And he's actually from my dad's. My dad's from Philadelphia, and my mom's from Kearney, New Jersey, where John's from. She went to Kearney High School, so I took her there. And then when I played on the under-20 World Cup team, Walter Barr was he called me Kensington Fishtown because my dad's from Fishtown, and that was the area there. But yeah, he came back, and then Tim had a great game. That was Donegan's last game. Tim came back and scored 3 goals.
Might have been 4-3, right? That BU won or something.
Yeah, I can't remember the score. I just remember because we would always track each other, and this is before the internet, right? So it's and pre-cell phones, and we were always on the phone everyone's trying to figure out what everyone's doing and whatnot. But Tim was a great player, and I talked to Tim recently. His son is a forward at UVA and doing very well.
Oh,
so,
wow.
and wearing number 9 as well. So it's that was my college number, But yeah, again, you talk about DeBoer, and DeBoer was a coach. John Hodgson, who we're all very close. John was influential. But you remember that staff? It was you, John, as our head coach, and then we had Hodgson and DeBoer as our assistants. So that was fun. Yeah, it was a good staff.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another one for you, Lyle. It's not a question, but it's I'm not sure who it's from. It's from 86 Pac Fan 86. I attended Lyle's summer camp back in the 90s. It was so fun and helped reinforce my love for the game. Thanks for cultivating my love for the game.
That's a nice comment. It's funny. I'm sitting here in my home office, so I've got different things up, but one of them is actually that camp. So a picture of the camp. So I'd run called the Soccer Success. I used the logo for my Danish team. And it was fun. And Mike Chergwin, Mike Serber, just some UConn players would come work it with me. And we had a great time. It was a 9 to noon camp for the younger age groups. And then the older age groups, we ran at night, which were smaller numbers. But no, I appreciate that. It's we had the best time. So it was mutual. We had so much fun with running those camps. So.
Jim and I did a lot of those 9 to 12 camps for younger kids in Connecticut, actually.
Yeah, they're fun, especially at that age, because actually it was 7 to 12. So I remember we would always start off and it was trick of the day. So we were at the center circle and everyone had the ball and we're teaching megs and catching the ball in your neck and all that. And the kids loved it. And I think they got a Gatorade if they could do it or whatnot. And they broke into their groups and different skills and whatnot. But they loved the first portion with all the tricks with the ball. So, and then the crossbar games and everything else. But yeah, that was a fun period.
Okay. Bonnie Ryan says, I'm very proud of my former student, Lyle. Amazing recall of games from ages ago.
Yeah. So, she say amazing student or no, I'm joking. I remember Mrs. Ryan, Jim Ryan's mom was, she was great. She was my math teacher in school. So at Mansfield Middle School. So, yeah, I remember really good memories of those classes and at Mansfield Middle School, and then obviously playing with Jim. And I spoke with Jim recently. We actually had a Zoom call with a lot of the guys from our class, and we reconnected. So he was a good player too on our state championship team.
And Bonnie's daughter teaches at E.O. Smith, Kathy.
Oh, Kathy's there at E.O. Smith now. Yeah.
Yeah. English teacher. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So 86, Pac-Fan 86 is Joe Cherical, class of 2005.
Ah, great.
Wow.
And then Brian Morgan says, good seeing you, Lyle, and Coach Blomstrann. Many great memories on that E.O. Smith championship team of 1985.
That's great. Well, the first, he was a top camper, by the way. He had great skills. I remember him. I do remember him with the ball. And I missed the second one. You cut out. Who's is it? You say Brian Morgan?
The goalkeeper. Yeah. Brian.
Yeah,
Morgan.
Brian was great. So we follow each other on Instagram, and he's he came up with some big saves. So I remember the game at Wilbur Park. So it's good to hear all these names from the past. But good to hear from you, Brian.
JoJo was a captain and very positive captain, and it wasn't one of our best E.O. Smith teams, but he kept telling the team, we're going to beat Glastonbury. We're going to beat Glastonbury. We go there, and JoJo scored a hat trick, and we beat Glastonbury 5-1. And, that was when we weren't as dominant as we were when you were there, Lyle. It was amazing. It's just he was amazingly positive captain. It was great for the team.
That's great. If I remember he carried the ball so well. He was very smooth. It's there. So I remember a little Claudio. What's that?
He was the third Cherical.
Yeah. Okay. So
Matt went to Princeton, actually, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. And JoJo played for Elvis Comrie, I think, at Holy Cross.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time. Lyle, thanks so much. This has been fantastic, and the combination of learning about your, what you've been doing, and the, the growth of the young American player recently has been really exciting to see. And we were talking the other day. I know that El Salvador and Panama didn't have their best sides, but we stuck 6 by both of them. I mean, there were many years when we would have been, happy to win that match 2-1.
Yeah, and with a lot of young players coming through, because you had 2 different groups. You had the group that was in Wales and Austria, so the European contingent prior to that did very well, and then so the player pool's just expanded, and it's going to be really, it's nice. It's a nice problem to have as a head coach, to have selection problems, and it also just inherently the training sessions become so competitive because everyone's fighting for their spots and whatnot. So I think the future of U.S. soccer is really bright. A lot of top young kids coming through. It's exciting, and I'm looking forward.
Well, Darlington Nagby was out of the Columbus game, and there was a 19-year-old from Ohio, right, who played like the deep center midfield position. I thought he played great. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, Aiden Morris is a very good player. He did well. He was at IU for season that came in, and it's so interesting when you see big names, whether injury or COVID or have to exit a team, and then someone stepping up. But that was such a big moment for him, and I thought he played really well. And it's tough because he had to anchor that midfield as well, right? And you have Christian Roldan and so really seasoned players that you have to compete against at the
a couple of his interceptions, it seemed like, almost led to the goal that came after that for Columbus.
He played very, very well. So another example of just a young player getting an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Lyle. It was great, I'm sure, for everybody.
Yeah, great to be on anytime. Great to see you guys, and look forward to hopefully seeing you guys in person sometime soon.
All right.
Thanks, Lyle.
Take care. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.